Hi, my name is Shannon Noonan. When most people think of the risk posed from flooding, they think of property damage and personal safety. But did you know that it is also a significant water quality issue? It can lead to beach closures, shellfish restrictions, and wreak havoc on the local ecosystem for months to come. So today we're going to talk to some experts. Joining me now is Megan Granato, the Manager of Sustainability and Resilience for the Town of Groton, Connecticut. Hi, Megan.
Hey, Shannon. I'm good, thanks.
So first I want to ask you if you could tell us a little bit about yourself and the work you do for the Town of Groton.
Sure, happy to. My title is sort of a mouthful, so I like to break down what the two main words in it mean to me to explain the work that I do. So with resiliency, it's all about helping the Town of Groton prepare for and also respond to the impacts of climate change, like flooding, the topic of today's show, but also things like extreme heat and droughts. And also on the climate front, I work to find ways that the Town of Groton can reduce its contributions to the climate crisis by helping reduce its greenhouse gas emissions. The sustainability piece is all about how we can be making natural resource management decisions today that can help create a healthy environment for future generations. So as you can imagine, it's a really dynamic job, and I very much enjoyed the 2 years that I've held this position with the Town of Groton.
So today we're talking about flooding. It seems that the frequency of large intense storms has been increasing lately. Can you tell us more about that?
Yes, and that's true, unfortunately. Research has shown, for example, in the Northeast, between the years 1901 and 2016, there's actually a 38% increase in the amount of water falling in the heaviest 1% of storm events. But in order to explain why, I'm going to back up a little bit first to the basics of climate and weather. And there's an old adage that climate is what you expect, weather is what you get. So the weather today, we're so lucky, it's this beautiful sunny day. Other days it's cold, it's rainy. That's what we're experiencing at any given day. Whereas climate is weather patterns studied over longer periods of time, decades, even longer. So climate change then is a shift in the long-term weather patterns that we're experiencing here on Earth. And due to a number of reasons, our climate is warming. There are two main ways that a warming climate helps lead to the increased frequency of these really large storm events. The first is that as the Earth warms, the major bodies of water on Earth, like its oceans, also warm. Warmer waters evaporate more at a higher rate. So if you remember science class back in grade school, evaporation is the process through which liquid water, like the water behind us here, actually turns into water vapor and goes up into the atmosphere. So because evaporation rates are increasing, we have more water vapor entering the atmosphere. The second main reason is that a warmer atmosphere can actually hold more water vapor. So we have more water going up, the atmosphere is able to hold more. So ultimately, when we get storm events then, they tend to be these larger deluges with more precipitation falling down because there's more water up in the atmosphere returning to the Earth's system.
So, but storms are necessary though, correct?
They are. So what I just described is part of the water cycle. And the water cycle overall is the movement of water through the Earth and its ecosystems and also the atmosphere. And so the process of storms in which that water returns from the atmosphere to Earth is important in sustaining life on Earth because we're dependent on water, right? We need water to live.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Okay, so we know that flooding, obviously it involves water, but are there other factors that contribute to flooding?
Absolutely. So the water coming down from the atmosphere in terms of the amount of water and how quickly it falls, that's one big piece of the puzzle. But the other big piece of the puzzle are the conditions on Earth where the water is falling. So by that, I mean different features of the Earth's landscape, and that can include the topography. Are there mountains or valleys? What's the soil like in that location? It can also mean, are there natural systems? Is there wetlands, like the marsh adjacent to us? Are there forests? But also the built environment. So is the rain falling where there's a lot of parking lots and buildings? Because all of those systems influence how water is going to move once it hits the Earth's surface. Natural systems, like wetlands, like forests, they're able to absorb some of that precipitation when it falls. And by that, I mean they allow water to actually move down into the soil. Conversely, hardened structures like parking lots, like rooftops, they don't allow that. They actually, if you think of a parking lot, it's blocking the soil underneath from receiving that water. And so instead, the water that falls onto those surfaces become what we call stormwater runoff, because the water literally runs off those surfaces. And unfortunately, one of the byproducts of our development is that humans have replaced a lot of these natural systems with these man-made hardened surfaces. So in response to that, in a lot of locations, a lot of development, humans had to build stormwater management systems. And those systems helped to funnel and move water to keep it away from assets like buildings. Unfortunately, as these storms that we experience get larger and more intense, the systems that were built maybe decades ago aren't necessarily large enough to handle that amount of water, and they can become overwhelmed. So the good news is that there are things that we can do about this, and one of the main sort of types of practices that we think of is called green infrastructure, also called low impact development, low impact design, or LID practices, if you've heard of that. And those practices mimic natural hydrology. So by that I mean they allow the rainwater to collect and move into the soil. So a good example that some people are familiar with is a rain garden, is one type of green infrastructure. And so we're able to use those types of practices to help expand the capacity of a stormwater system. The dual benefit is that these practices also help improve water quality at the same time, because they are allowing that water to infiltrate in, and there's filtration that happens. And so an example of a local project there we're working on in Groton is we have a grant from the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation to look at all of our town owned and managed properties and the impervious surfaces in terms of the driveways and the parking lots and the sidewalks and the pathways, and look at the locations that are the best candidates for replacement with permeable pavement or permeable pavers. And that is something that is going to lead to us actually partially designing 3 priority projects, and we're going to share the lessons learned through a regional workshop, which we're really excited about.
That's really awesome. So it sounds like the permeable pavement project will definitely take a lot less of a burden off of the flooding that we've been experiencing in Groton.
Yeah, we're hoping that it's one of the techniques that we can select, and we're going to be factoring in site-specific features like, are there flooding risks here? Or does this area contribute to an area that has flooding downstream? To, again, try to intercept some of that water, retain it, allow it to pass through the system more slowly, decreasing downstream flood risk, and also achieving those water quality benefits at the same time.
Thank you so much, Megan. That was a really great introduction, and we really appreciate the work that you do for the town of Groton. So we're going to take a quick break, and then when we return, we're going to be speaking more about flooding with Save the Sounds Bill, Lucey.
What are you doing?
I'm destroying this puddle that could flood our entire neighborhood.
What are you talking about?
Well, it may not look so dangerous right now. Did you know it only takes 6 inches of fast-moving water to knock over a person? It only takes 12 to make a car float. You only need 2 feet to make a big truck float. 3 feet of water can even severely damage a house. And with 10 feet of water, even elephants will be whisked away by the tide.
Wow. If what you say is true, then we better get to higher ground.
Oh, I mean, yeah, that might be a good idea, but splashing in the puddles is fun.
When the clouds form, the rain pours, and water is all around, you'll ask yourself, how prepared or unprepared are you? Did you raise your utilities, appliances and such? Install a sump pump, clean the drains, just in case it decides to rain. Do you know your risks? Have you checked the local plans? You should cover your property with a flood insurance policy. Is your emergency supply kit packed? Is your family prepared? Do they know what to do, where to go, and how to stay safe? Because when the water starts to rise, you must act quickly and be wise. Turn on your radio, listen for updates, and if authorities tell you to go, hurry up and do so. Get to safe ground, go as high as you can, do what you need to do, but don't put yourself in harm's way. Just inches of water can sweep you away. Once the water is gone, move carefully. Be on the lookout for dangers you can't see, animals, debris, and electricity. Do not go home until you hear the all clear. Now when you get home, be aware. Not everything is as safe as it may appear. So before the clouds form, the rain pours, and water is all around, get prepared. Make a plan and keep yourself dry. Get started today. Go to ready.gov/prepare.
Welcome back to our program. Today we're talking about flooding and water quality. Joining me now is Save the Sound's Long Island Soundkeeper, Bill Lucey.
Hi, good to be back.
Hi, thank you for coming back. From what I understand, last time in our program you educated us more on the Long Island Soundkeeper program.
Yep.
So today we want to talk more about like the unseen risk of flooding and the less talked about thing, which is its harm to water quality. So if we could just talk a little more about that, that'd be great. So first off, if you could just tell me, your job as being the Soundkeeper, how much of your job involves monitoring water quality?
Well, I'm under a program at Save the Sound called Water Protection, and that has many different facets. So we have a water quality lab that's certified in the state of New York now, and we do turbidity testing down there. So if there's construction runoff or any kind of silt in the water, we can test for that. We do a lot of bacteria monitoring as well. We have what's called a unified water study. So we're in about 40 bays and harbors with citizen scientists or community scientists testing the water. And I respond to a lot of pollution reports. Up this way in eastern Connecticut, I've had a few recently, and we will head out there and we'll test the water at our lab and see what the results are and then come back with recommendations.
Could you tell us more about how stormwater contamination harms the ecosystem?
Stormwater is the toughest water quality problem to deal with, and the way it harms the water systems, the drinking water, the ecosystem, it's many directions. The obvious one is it brings a lot of mud and junk when it floods into the water, but the stuff that you don't see are all the chemicals, all the contaminants, the bacteria. You can't see bacteria. But if you think about it, after we have these large rain events, a lot of beaches will close down. And that's because there's been overflows of sewage treatment plants. There's old collection systems that can't handle the water. Our stormwater systems are undersized, so they're failing. You get all the sheet flow from the landscape, so pet waste, Canada goose waste, leaching septic systems, especially in bedrock systems, which you find up here in eastern Connecticut, that can all ooze out into the water, especially during these flooding events.
So when talking about flooding and pollution, could you tell us what the difference is between non-point source pollution and point source pollution?
Yeah, so point source pollution, I have to say we've done a pretty good job at regulating. And what that means is there is a pipe attached to, say, a wastewater treatment plant or an industrial facility that's manufacturing something, and they all have permits to pollute. So they have what's called the National Pollution Elimination Discharge System Permit. It's a protection permit, NPDES, where you try and eliminate the discharges. So the National Pollution Discharge Elimination System, and we can sue on that. So one of the things that Save the Sound does is we look at those records and we see if there's an issue with people violating the Clean Water Act. And as part of the Clean Water Act, we have rights as citizens to make sure we have clean water. So the state's invested millions, hundreds of millions, even a few $1 billion, along with the towns, on cleaning up all of these wastewater treatment plants and ensuring industry isn't polluting. The real problem is the Nonpoint. There's no permit for the water running off of this parking lot.
Yeah.
So there is a permit for the municipalities, and that's called the Municipal Stormwater Permit. The MS4 program is the acronym, and that can be regulated. but it encompasses everything, all the non-point stuff, meaning pollution from parking lots, roads, lawns, that type of thing.
Right. Do scientists know what percentage of water pollution is from non-point and point source pollution?
Yeah, so from the point source pollution, they have to monitor on a regular basis, and they have to do monthly reports, and we can police those. So one of the functions of Save the Sound is to enforce the Clean Water Act, and we do that by monitoring what the reports say. And if someone's continually failing, we bring it up with the regulatory agencies, and if we need to, go to court. But with the non-point source information or pollution, we have to monitor in a surrogate kind of way. So for example, we have the Unified Water Study, which I mentioned earlier. And what that does is look at the ecological indicators of different bays and harbors. And you could tell if you have a stormwater problem, if you have too many nutrients in your bay, which is causing oxygen problems, or if you're getting hot water coming in or algae blooms, those types of things. So they can indicate poor stormwater runoff, and that's how it's manifesting itself out in the water.
So with a point source pollution, if there was a spill during a flood, my understanding would be that first responders, they assess the scene, they treat it, and they cap the source. Now, can that be done the same with non-point source pollution? Can that also be identified and treated?
It's really difficult to do that. When you have floods, you have to be really extremely careful because there's going to be debris coming from all different places. You're not necessarily going to be able to stop the sources of that. What we end up doing is after the fact, we have had tremendous floods over the last few years, and marinas getting clogged, and we'll organize local groups with boats and we'll go out and free up rivers and clogged areas in the estuaries and the bays and the harbors. When you have storms, you get things like chemical spills, like in Katrina. It's a point source, but it's really a non-point source because it's all over the place.
Yes.
And that becomes a real risk for first responders if they don't know what kind of pollution they're getting into. And there's going to obviously be bacteria from all the flooded sewage treatment plants and wastewater, the septic systems. So you have to be really careful when you respond and wear protective clothing.
Okay.
Yeah. So the way to cap it is to prevent the stuff from getting in the first place.
Well, that leads us nicely to the next question is, what can the public do to prevent pollution that is caused by flooding?
So first off, you need to know if you're in a flood zone, if your house or where you're renting apartment complex, and you're going to want to lift it up if possible. That's been a big business on the shoreline. That's expensive though, and so incomes that aren't as high, it's a little more difficult. But I've lifted houses before, small houses of my own in other places, but that can be done. Really what the town planning need to do, they need to provide alternative places for people to build. We shouldn't be building in the riparian zones. We should not be building in the floodplains, because once the water comes through someone's garage and house and septic, all that pollution, all the old paint cans, everything's gonna end up out in the water. But if you're there and you have to be there for now, I know there's one community in Bridgeport that was repeatedly flooding, and they put all their furnaces up high, all their washing machines and dryers up off the floor, because they'd flood out 2-3 times a year, and it was mixed with sewage and rainwater, and it made it easier to disinfect. But really, we want to avoid putting ourselves into these places that flood. The last one I'll mention, which is something that's been very hard to get across, is fertilizer leaches out. And so if your lawn's flooding, or even just flow coming off your lawn is taking all those nutrients, sucking it through groundwater or over sheet flow, and then indoor surface water every time it rains.
Yeah, and I imagine when I think of when people buy like potting soil, even sometimes they have the beads of fertilizer. You might not think you're fertilizing, but you might be.
Yeah, you want to use the most organic thing you can.
So is there anything you would like to add about water pollution as an unseen flood risk?
Yeah, it's the state of the national water has had reports coming out on a semi-regular basis, and the last one I read said only 28% of our nation's waters are healthy as far as fish and insect populations in them. That means 3/4 of our nation's waters are sick. They're not healthy. They're not the way they're supposed to be. Close to half of our waters aren't safe for recreation.
Wow.
91% of the freshwater fish they tested in this national inventory had PFAS in them. That's an unseen contaminant that we're working on regulating, but I ate a lot of fish growing up. I imagine I ingested a lot of that. In the state of Connecticut, we have slightly better numbers, but we still have lots of square miles of impeded estuary habitat, unhealthy habitat. We have 800 miles of rivers that have been tested. They haven't all been tested, that don't meet water quality standards. So it's really amazing to think 50+ years after the Clean Water Act, we still have extremely unhealthy systems in our state that are impacted by stormwater, and especially these ever increasing flooding events that just deliver these huge pulses of pollution. And the way to deal with it was mentioned a little bit before in the earlier interview, is that we need thousands and thousands of bioswales and rain gardens. We need big, thick green buffer zones along all our streams and lakes to catch all those nutrients, all the plastics, all the chemicals that are coming in. We need to have policies that help fund it, like stormwater utilities, stormwater authorities, and we need to do it soon. If the flooding in Oxford that we just saw and all around that area that killed a few people were amazed that they could see that damage, but it's happening in small places everywhere, these flooding events. I live in a dead-end road. It was a really old road, probably hadn't been paved in, I don't know, 40 years. We had a 9-inch event just in that area, and my road turned into a 6-inch deep trench, trapping my wife on her way to work.
Wow.
So we didn't get hardly any rain in that last flooding event. So with the whole climate change and the warming waters, as was explained earlier,
Yeah.
we're just getting these intense monsoon-like situations. And our infrastructure is a long way from being prepared to deal with it.
Okay, yeah, so it sounds like we really need to start paying attention to that. So we do want to talk more about solutions in our next episode, and we'd love to have you back also.
I'd be glad to. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for taking the time to come down today and talk with us, and you have a lot of knowledge, and I feel like I learned a lot.
All right,
Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us today. I hope you can join us on our next episode. We're going to continue the conversation about flooding and talk more about solutions. My name is Shannon Noonan, and thank you for watching.
Save the Sound, a proud partner of this program, leads environmental action in your region by fighting climate change, saving endangered lands, protecting the Sound and its rivers, and working with nature to restore ecosystems.